Fantastic. Okay, welcome to the last session of the SERC conference. We're here to talk about C&D. I'm Terri Ward, and I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the National Construction and Demolition Recycling Association. And I have the pleasure of, it didn't start out this way, but I have the pleasure of having a panel of I would say a group from the CDRA, unintentionally. All three of these gentlemen you're going to hear from are board members and leaders in their own areas in the C&D recycling space. So we're pleased to have them. Kicking us off is Chad Abell from Coastal Waste and Recycling. Chad had flight problems, so couldn't be here in person, so he's going to share with us virtually. So with that, Chad, would you like to go ahead?
Certainly. Thanks, Terri. I really appreciate it. And thanks to the SERC for allowing us to present today and talk a little bit about construction and demolition, as well as just show our support from Coastal Waste and Recycling to you guys. Just to start off with a little bit about Coastal Waste and Recycling. We basically founded the company in 2017 with about 15 employees at one location. And we decided to stick to three core values when we thought about opening the company: safety, integrity, and customer service. I think the words are pretty self-explanatory, and we felt if we followed these three core values, we would be successful. With that, Coastal has grown from those 25 or so employees in one site to 40 separate operating locations in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. About 1,600 employees and 27 or 24 post collections, of which 10 of those are recycling centers, either C&D, what we call in Florida Class 3, which is your dry waste or commercial recycling, residential recycling. We also incorporated some aggregate management and scrap metals. So again, thank you for letting us present here today. What I was going to talk about was C&D systems, the typical C&D systems, how we take a mix of materials from demolition or from the construction activities and turn it into commodity products to sell back to the market and a reclaimed and beneficial reuse in other areas. So what I have laid out here is one of our systems we've been designing. This is one of our new ones that'll hopefully be online here in 2026. But for the most part, most C&D systems run about the same way, few added features that may be different from market to market. So just to walk through this for those that haven't seen a C&D system before, if you start on your left side where the primary screen 8 inches, pretty typical. Everything is cut basically by size before it's sorted into its individual components. So from that primary screen, all the overs or the 8-inch plus materials basically go to an A line, which is the most rudimentary portion of the sorting. So this is your large materials that just have to be done from a manual perspective. The idea of robotics or optics or things like that, the material is so inconsistent, heavy, light, backwards, forwards, that it has always maintained to be a very manual system. The unders, on the other hand, pass through a magnet, and then they typically go up what we call the B line. That'll hit a trommel to start getting our fines out of the material. Then we send it to destoners, passing by an eddy current, depending upon your market and your waste mix. The eddy current is something that we've looked at just applying to our systems here recently in the last 12 months and seeing how that pans out for us. As well as the main trommel and fine screens, based upon the market, you may be screening that further in order to try to utilize that as beneficial reuse beyond landfill cover. The most typical area that the fines are going to go to is be beneficially reused at a landfill for daily cover in order to minimize the amount of material they're taking out of their borrow areas or mine activities. You can see the bunkers. That's where all the commodities on the A line go. On this particular design, these bunkers are all pushed through. So the bunkers would push from the bottom of the screen all the way underneath the system to the tops where it says fine screens, and that way allows each individual component to be thrown from multiple different locations in the system. The other thing that we added to these systems that might be a little bit unique, I've seen it done in Chicago with our friends from LRS, which is embedding a shredder for wood into the bunkers, which allows it for immediate processing of the wood material. Makes this a lot easier to ship. Typically, these are a 4 to 6 inch screen. Makes it a lot easier to put on a semi and walk off at the end user. Somebody else that might be maybe turning it into mulch or coloring for flower bedding. So that's been a really good benefit for us. It also allows us to sell that product at a higher price point because they will be processing it a little bit cheaper. So to kind of wrap up the processes here, the materials that we're typically recovering in our construction and demolition material are going to be your ferrous material, non-ferrous material, wood, cardboard, concrete, some vegetation, the fines, as we discussed, primarily a landfill cover product. And then, of course, you still have your residue, which is composed of non-recyclable materials or just materials where the value is too low to put a full effort into recovery. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we recover and why we recover certain things in the next couple slides. So that is your typical layout for a C&D system, primarily in Florida or the southern states. The visuals here are our first facility that we constructed. This is our Pompano location, located in Pompano Beach, Florida, which is Broward County. Then the bigger city known in that area is Fort Lauderdale. So how do we choose what equipment we're going to use in order to do the sorting system? Of course, you're going to be looking at the total volume that you anticipate coming in, the inbound materials type, which could be new build versus demo, the geography. Obviously we're down in the tropics, so our materials that are typically used in building are going to be a lot more concrete for the roofing, cinder block walls. Whereas a system that would be up north is going to be a lot more wood. So you're going to pick this equipment based upon the material type you expect to come in, and of course throughput for your area. This particular system that is shown here can do approximately 1,100 tons per day, or somewhere between 75 and 120 tons per hour, depending upon the type material. And this system was also designed to accept in Florida a Class 3 or a dry commercial waste stream, which makes this site a little bit higher in our cardboard recovery as well as some rigid plastics. So when we talk about the different types of material you're going to be going after, this is going to dictate the screening that you're using. Primarily on the fines, I talked about it a little bit before, where the fines may or may not be able to be used beyond a landfill application. If you're able to do that, you would go from a 2-inch screen down to something smaller, all the way down to a 1/4 inch, if there's other fill capabilities. RSM, or the fines that are generated, have been a topic of discussion for quite a long time in Florida on whether or not they can be reused and what the impacts would be. So this is something that's often discussed with our DEP, and in areas like Miami-Dade County, they've been restricted to be used. So we're always looking for those outlets, and that also helps you determine what machinery you're going to use. For example, this location only does a primary fines cut versus our locations over in Fort Myer, where we're using further sizing processing to make multiple different products. Typically, you're going to see out of our system in Pompano, really out of all 10 of the systems that are doing processing, a typical percentage range of about 32 to 42% of residue, 3 to 5% metal, 1/4% to 1% maximum of our non-ferrous materials, 2% OCC. Concrete is going to run 15 to 25%, fines 20 to 30%, and then wood and vegetation is going to be about 8 to 12%. That's going to be pretty typical of a recycling facility, probably in the southeast, again, your geography is going to well dictate what else you're going to do and how else you're going to build your system. From an operational standpoint, the other thing is really going to affect the systems that you run is how much staff do you have and how much mechanically do you want to do versus manually? What is your labor pool that's out there? And as we saw through COVID, with a very minimal amount of labor being available to post-COVID, where wages have gone up, I would say since 2018, when we fired up our first system, we've seen approximately 30% increase in wages. And when you're talking about 13 to 16 people being on a line, that's quite an impact that you have to put back on the customer from a pricing standpoint, potentially do further recovery, and be more efficient with the equipment you own. And that's what we've seen a lot, is analyzing different pieces of equipment that can get into the system and do this without the risk we would put onto an employee from an injury standpoint. And you're just trading off capital investment for labor expenses. So on the operations, what are we looking for? And you can see in the picture that I have here, there's an example of two things, which is your burden depth, which is also typical of what you're looking at from a residential single stream. What's my burden depth and what's my black belt, which is controlled primarily by the guy that's feeding the line. This is a poor example of having too much black belt, but in the piles of material that are sitting in front of the crew, it's a pretty good burden depth. The guys have exposure to almost all the material that are in front of them. They can determine the difference between metal and copper by the use of hand magnets, and they have the opportunity to get to the material. Of course, you want to balance that out with a quantity of black belt that is deemed acceptable. The last thing on that is what we've been seeming to struggle with finding is heavy equipment operators. We always hear in the waste industry how hard it is to find drivers. We're starting to see a gap as well with qualified heavy equipment operators. So we have to be very proactive with our staff, which we kind of have a idea of bringing our staff in from a contingent or a temporary labor workforce, determining that they're consistent and that they can provide the value we want on the line, they can show up on time, and then bringing them on staff. We kind of have a rule of thumb. From a temporary to on staff, you got about 90 days. If in those 90 days you can't prove that you are a good coastal employee, we part ways with you and bring somebody else on the tryout. Once you become on staff, we really promote learning the small equipment. And after learning the small equipment, seeing if you can be administrative or graduate onto larger equipment. So in this process, we're creating our own operators, because as you can imagine, in your high density population areas, not a lot of people are growing up on a farm, operating equipment since they were a child. They're coming straight out of high school looking for the opportunities, and they may have never even heard what an excavator is or never seen one in person. So the basic idea is give them some upward mobility, which is great for them, allows them to increase their wage earnings, learn a new skill, and it makes for a much more loyal employee and dedicated employee to the company, trying to do the best we can do every day. So there's a little bit of the challenges we encounter. A little bit back to the burden depth and the black belt. Been working on incorporating some artificial intelligence, which, that's the buzzword lately. Of course, you can't hear anything out without hearing artificial intelligence. And we're trying to figure out how to put these in our operations. Simple thing, as I said, burden depth and black belt greatly affect our productivity and our results. So we're utilizing AI to do measurements to determine what is the percentage of black belt. The next morning or immediately, our heavy equipment operators can see how well they've been loading the line. We can write down and note what was I doing because there was a pause that caused black belt. Working on getting that immediate feedback via a tablet in the operator's cab with him to indicate you're not hitting your marks. And then, of course, the next day download and have an average, have a competition between the guys. really try to get that focused in and better at these items that are going to help us recover better as well as be very productive. Want to kind of wrap up on some of the reasons why we go after certain materials or don't. There's diminishing returns, of course, to how much effort, whether it's capital investment or labor, that you're going to put into the products you're trying to pull off the line. So that may fluctuate with your outlets. If you're going to, recover something at a zero return, that takes a lot of effort to get. Even though you have disposal avoidance and cost, it still might not overtake that value compared to just allowing it to go to the end of the line. So we're always analyzing what our outlets are, and I think that's what each individual person, when they look at doing a C&D sorting system, is where are my outlets, who's close by, and how do I need to get it there? And then, of course, what's my disposal rates? Is it worth doing this process? Or is the landfill cheaper for my customers, and no one's going to come at $15 to $20 an hour? In order for us to run these systems, our inbound rate has to be high enough. So that's kind of how we determine where we put these systems, what effort we're putting into it. So with those last little things, I'll throw it back to Eugene and see if anybody in the audience had any questions.
Thanks, Chad. Great presentation. Any questions from the audience? I think Chad did a great job of providing an overview of all the issues dealt with in a typical C&D operation. I failed to mention earlier that Joe Curo, who is on your program, who was going to be first up, got ill, and so thank you, Chad, for adjusting your program to take some of the high-level, overview to share with folks. I've got a couple of questions if nobody does from the audience. Oh, we've got one over here.
Yeah.
Hi, Candace.
Chad, I want to know what you're doing with your concrete out of Largo and Sarasota.
Sure. So in Largo and Sarasota, we take it to our aggregate facilities. We recently acquired and merged with Southwest Waste Systems, and they're a big company into the aggregate market. We do the same over on the East Coast, and we have for a while. So all our concrete goes to an aggregate yard for further classification and processing. So creating a lot of 57s, paver sands, things that sell to market, the higher quality materials is graded for use in highway construction and various other sundry of items.
Bob.
Yeah, Chad. Hey, Bob Huffer, General Kinematics. Just wanted to ask, I've been seeing the migration of coastal going a little further north in the state of Florida and even outside of Florida a bit. Can you just comment, I guess, just on the overall direction and strategy, maybe where you guys are going?
Sure. I think coastal's always been focused since day one on sort of the southeast region. Of course, we love the platform. Myself and our CEO, Brendan Pantano, did a lot of work in Southeast Florida, so we felt we knew the customer base, and we felt with the growth in Florida that there was just a huge opportunity for us here. I think once the platform went really well, we just looked outside and looked for the same format. Where's the high density population? And that's not necessarily where's the high population growth on a percentage basis. That'll provide us with a customer base that's going to keep increasing, especially when we focused in construction and demolition. We need those new housing markets. We need the tear downs in Miami in order to support that piece of the volume we like to play in. And for everybody else, let me flip back here. There's Bob's screen right there at the Pompano location.
Thanks for that plug there, Chad. Bob appreciates it if you didn't see his thumbs up. Yes, Rodrigo.
And I'm Rodrigo Belisario from Titan Cement. And can you mention again the streams or the residues that you are looking at home for? Probably the overs, ultralights, or some other things coming from your B line that we might be able to help with?
Sure. Obviously, the fines and the light fractions that come off of a C&D line are going to be a little more inert material than you would see in a, say, a residential single stream facility. But right now, the light fractions are being commingled with the A line or the greater than A inch. We haven't found a great market for it, but because the system is passing, and I failed to mention the de-stoners at the end where it's creating the super light fraction, we have the ability to separate it, which does open up more of your fuel supply, more of your better material. But we haven't found the perfect match. I think the one place in Palm Beach County is the county, which we use occasionally for residue, does accept that light fraction at a reduced rate for their burn plant because it does promote a much higher level BTU value once you've removed, say 90% of your inert materials. But other than the SWA, we just really haven't found that outlet sans a C&D or Class 3 landfill in Florida currently.
Great question. I was going to ask the same thing, Rodrigo. I'd heard from some work done a few years back, looking at the light fraction C&D residual was being looked at being used, and there was some higher chlorine content to it.
We do it right now. We receive from two C&Ds in the ultralights and the overs. And sorry, we do it right now at our Miami plant. We receive the ultralights and the overs from two C&Ds in the area. And again, we're expanding, looking for more. We have tested some of the fine fraction SRM, as you call it.
RSM.
RSM, and yeah, it's challenging but doable. For at least for our cement plant, chlorides are always an issue, but depending on how much, it can be manageable. And so yeah, I think we can. There is something that we can do together down there in South Florida.
Great.
Great.
Appreciate that. Chad, I've got Rodrigo's card for you, so I'll make sure to connect you up after our meeting here. You bring up a great point about the RSM. I'm curious about, Chad, and I think I may answer the question in part. Depending on what you have on your B line, some plants I've seen do finer screening, do an additional heavy light separation, and particularly in some Florida plants, the RSM can visually at least look very clean and very usable, at least as a fill. Now, obviously it needs to be tested, but I'm aware of some testing at some plants that show that RSM could be good material outside the landfill, but knowing there's this regulatory barrier against using it outside the landfill. Do you see that changing at all, and is this something you all have looked at as far as treating your fines and taking another step or two?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think on the East Coast, just because of the atmosphere in Miami-Dade County specifically, there's just not that outlet for it. And the other problem too, in these tighter facilities, Pompano Beach, Miami, even Palm Beach County, when you're going to do the testing required for the RSM, you need a bit more property to keep some material there. And 1,000 ton a day facility generating 20%, you can see that it'll pile up pretty quick.
Yeah.
But in other areas of the state, we are 100% looking at that and seeing what kind of densities they can pass, taking a look at the constituents in the RSM to make sure it's environmentally sound and safe to be used as fill in various locations. And I think it's just a partnership with the DEP to ensure everything matches up and that we're not going to harm the environment. So always looking into that 100%. I think the state has been trying to find a solution to that for a number of years. Just been very difficult to move forward officially.
Sure, understand. Obviously, to your point, a lot at stake there, as difficult as it is because of the volumes you generate, equally the opportunity, right, to keep that diverted from landfill. And from what I hear, you can't have enough aggregates here in the Florida market. It seems like there's a good uses for them outside the landfill. So that's exciting to know it's being worked on. Any other questions from the audience? I think all the questions I had for you, Chad, were asked, but we'll give just a second. Anybody else? You guys on the panel? What's your, I'll just ask you, what is your most troublesome end market? Is there a material? We've got, you can't see him here, but we have Terri Weaver and Dan Horton up next that'll talk about, secondary processing and end markets for some of the constituent materials. Is there something that, if you could wave your magic wand, we'd find an end market for?
Yeah, I think, rigids is always up and down, as far as, how do we allocate enough space, to contain enough material and ship it, efficiently because it's so light. And the other market that can be difficult is wood. I mean, one of the things that should be the easiest to recycle and grinding in some way is just finding those outlets consistently for it. It's a little bit up and down of who's doing what and they're trying to produce. But as you said, the aggregates is probably the best. And that's why we invested in that ourselves, to kind of control the end market of that, because it can be resold, and that's probably the best. And the worst of things right now is the rigids and woods on the troublesome side, but manageable. And then the aggregates kind of being my favorite, other than the typical high dollar amount in ferrous and non-ferrous.
And rigid, you're referring to plastic there?
Correct.
Yeah, just want to
Your
make sure.
buckets, lids. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Rodrigo wants it all, so
Perfect.
I'm happy to broker a deal here, so when you
Yeah.
guys are ready.
I'll see you in Broward County next week, Rodrigo.
He'll bring his truck with him, truck full of residue. All right, great. Last chance, we'll let Chad go and introduce our other speakers here. Going. Thank you so much, Chad, for joining us and filling in the gap there that we had from Joe. Appreciate it, and have an awesome day.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, next up, we're moving to additional end markets or uses of the materials that are extracted from MRFs like Chad's, like coastals, and some key opportunities. And up next will be Terri Weaver, and Terri heads up the CDRA's Gypsum Recycling Committee, which has been extremely active, and you couldn't probably have a more knowledgeable resource in the country than Mr. Weaver, who's almost single-handedly pioneered the practice, and I'll let him talk more about USA, but I can't say enough about what he's done for the industry. So Terri Weaver.
Thank you, Terry Ward. We have a joke between us since our initials are even the same. She's T1 and I'm T2, so that's how we keep from getting confused. So just a little bit about who we are and what we do. I run the Gypsum Drywall Recycling Group, which is USA Gypsum, but our parent company is involved in a couple of different things gypsum related. We have three actually, pelleting plants. So we pelletize gypsum that gets used as a fertilizer ingredient. Of course, we take in post-consumer drywall, and then we also take in manufacturing rejects. We are recovering several monofills as we speak, cleaning that material up and sending it back into beneficial use. Right now, we also broker some gypsum on occasion, although that's not our focus. It's just when it happens to fit. And our markets are agriculture or building products specifically, and that's our focus. Last year, we moved about 1.5 million tons of gypsum. So that's kind of who we are, and of course we're here to talk about gypsum drywall recycling, and as Terry mentioned, my part-time job is working with our Gypsum Recycling Association, and we've really come a long way. We have a good section of collaborators from manufacturers to distributors, waste generators, recyclers, and with P1's help, we came up with this graphic, and I think it does a good job of showing the moving parts, starting in the upper left there where you start out with paper, water, and gypsum. You know, a product is manufactured, it's distributed, then either constructed or deconstructed, so the waste is generated. We then hope it's recovered, some of it going into a closed loop, and some which we would call closed loop, of course, or some open loop in agriculture and cement. And unfortunately, most of it is still disposed, and we hope to change that moving forward. So one of the things that we've been working hard on is that, oh, there we go. If I look at the right button, it would help. It seems like it was set on, there's where I was. Can you turn the auto forward off, perhaps? I might have sent that to you by accident. Let's see. But anyhow, on this slide, seems to be more interest in gypsum drywall recycling now than there was in the past, and we think the market drivers or the causes for that are the fact that there is much less flue gas desulfurization gypsum produced from coal-fired power plants. Some people call it synthetic gypsum. That was a very important part of the supply chain, which has now dropped about in half over the last, I'd say, 10 years. Mining costs, of course, are not going down, and if there's anything that's almost as difficult to site as a new landfill, it's a new mine. So that's not easy either. Disposal costs, as you know, are going up. There's been a lot of work done on the risks that adding gypsum to landfill creates in the way of releasing hydrogen sulfide and what an impact that has potentially as either a nuisance or a contaminant in recovered gases or even in the leachate. There's also a patchwork of regulation going on, some in the West Coast, some in the Northeast primarily, but there are individual cities coming up with bans and restrictions on drywall. So unfortunately, that's a case where maybe we could use some more uniform regulation, even though we don't like to advocate for regulation always. And then last and I guess not least probably is everybody's looking at carbon footprints, and that includes the drywall manufacturers who are looking at their waste streams and how they can reincorporate those, and also for end markets such as Portland cement, for example, looking at more recycled materials. So that plays another small part in what I think is increasing the interest in gypsum drywall recycling. So how much gypsum we're really talking about? In the United States, 44 million tons. About half of that are mined in the United States, but about 8 million, almost 8 million, is imported primarily from Nova Scotia, Mexico, and Spain. So obviously all this talk of tariffs have some people in the gypsum supply chain a little bit nervous. And there's still 14.5 million tons of FGD being produced and mostly being used. Now I think the last numbers I saw showed almost 80% of the FGD being produced was now actually being utilized and not being monofilled or landfilled. So how much drywall? Because we got to start talking about drywall to see how much waste. 27 million tons sold. That of course includes some paper, so that's about 10% of those tons. The waste produced is, according to the EPA, 15 million tons. 4 million of that's new construction scrap, and 11 million tons are demolition. This information's dated, and I'll be frank with you, I don't have a tremendous amount of confidence in those numbers, but it's what we have available to us right now. And so where's all that waste going? Here again, EPA 2018, 13 million going to landfill, only 200,000 going back into manufacturing of new products. That might be up slightly in the years that passed since 2018, and about 2 million going into agriculture as fertilizer or soil amendments. So, I mean, that's a national scale, and really we're here to talk about the Southeast a little bit. So as we drill down into that, here again, we don't have numbers that give us a high confidence level, but there have been various mixed waste studies done. I've listed them here. They average 7%. gypsum inclusion from mixed waste. And so if we look at Florida, I think your most recent year was 2023 at 4 million tons of C&D. So in theory, you would have somewhere around 287,000 tons of drywall waste being produced just in the state of Florida. One of the numbers that I have a little more confidence in, which is remarkably different, is a recent Sarasota County waste composition study that they agreed that I could share. And they're seeing 22% by weight as gypsum drywall and 14% by volume. It's a very detailed study, very good work. And I'm sure if you reached out to Sarasota County, they would probably share the full report, but I'm not at liberty to do that without their permission. So another way I look at it is there are reports on how much drywall gets shipped into and sold into regions. The problem is that USGS lumps a whole bunch of states together, and so these are unreliable because I compiled them. I take those tons and then split them out by the state population levels just to get some sense of, okay, you know, based on population, how much waste is there? That shows a higher number at 367,000 tons, but either way, it's a significant number and would have an impact on the markets here in Florida. So how much gypsum is consumed in Florida? Here again, very unreliable numbers because I'm compiling them from my experience and nothing much else. We know that you have 3 drywall manufacturers in the state. A typical drywall manufacturing plant uses 500,000 tons per year. I believe there are 6 Portland cement manufacturing plants in the state, and probably the average is 40,000 tons. Some are higher, but up. So 50 average, higher, 60. We're bidding at 60. So there's 360,000, 400,000 tons. And then agriculture, actually have some reports, but I just got them and I really, frankly, I looked at the number and didn't believe it. So we're going to say the market is somewhere around 1.7 million tons and probably pushing up to 2 million. So that's the gypsum consumption within the state of Florida. So why aren't we recovering that gypsum and sending it all to Titan Cement? So I think the barriers are it's not an easy product to keep separate or to separate from the waste stream. If you look at a process that was just described for coastal, you notice they're not recovering gypsum drywall, and there's probably a good reason for that, and there might be several. But it's not easy to separate from the waste stream in a mechanized process. Your tip fees here in the southeast tend to be a little lower than what we're dealing with in some of our northeast and northwest states. Transportation is always a factor, so where is it generated and where is it consumed? And then last but probably not least, I am not aware of anybody in the state processing post-consumer drywall waste. So even if you were to separate at some point, somebody's got to build the infrastructure to process it, separate the paper, and come up with a good product that can be utilized in manufacturing of new building materials. So the elephant in the room, deconstruction gypsum, and a lot of people would like to call this demolition. We don't like to call it that because really, if you're gonna try to recycle gypsum coming from a demolition project, it is going to need to be deconstructed carefully just to get it out intact. And then there are the other risks, there are asbestos risks and paint, potentially lead paints that need to be managed. We all recognize that that's supposed to be abated before it comes in, but that's not necessarily 100%, and most end users are afraid of that risk. The drywall manufacturers absolutely won't consider it at this point. It also is going to need to be source separated, somehow handled separately. Depending on your end markets, may require a whole management system to manage that abatement documentation. So to document that, in fact, it did come from a facility where there was lead and asbestos abatement and documents. And then quality control is more difficult because inevitably demolition materials have more contaminants in, and so you've got to be more conscious of that process. So why isn't it picked in a mixed C&D processing line like Chad described for us? The first is if you push it up on that pile that you see pictured there, you're readily losing a great deal of as it breaks up and is pushed up with loaders and maybe handled with grapples. So the facilities that I see that do a good job of pulling drywall waste do it on the tip floor. They have a setup or on one side of the tip floor when they see loads coming in that are high percentages of gypsum drywall. They drop it there, do a negative QC pick because inevitably if it came from a job site, there's, you know, the lunch waste and whatever mixed in. So a little bit of QC on it. And we see facilities that have consistently pulled from the front end 3 to 5%. But if it goes across, that gets pushed up into that pile, picked up with grapples, crosses those screens, and maybe even has a pre-shredder in some systems, there's not enough identifiable drywall up there on the line to justify somebody sitting there looking for it because they're just not going to pull enough tons and there won't be enough cost avoidance to make it worthwhile for the processing system. So we see a lot of creative systems, especially up by us. We've seen some dedicated carts go out that are actually moved around in box trucks instead of roll-offs, which is a very interesting strategy that is gaining some traction, actually. And then if we see even some Packer trucks, people in New York City like to talk about using minis, small carts. They'll dump them in the Packer trucks and smash them so they get more tons as they run through Manhattan. And of course, dedicated roll-offs, you know, that are set on a job site and marked drywall only and, you know, are received at our facility as mostly drywall. Again, so a little QC needed in those cases. But your end markets require consistent quality and supply. And so right now we kind of have a challenge in this part of the world where we don't have the processing capability, and so we don't have anybody pulling the supply, and somebody needs to make a move if we want to make this happen. So that's almost the end of my presentation. If you really want to take a deep dive into this, the CDRA, along with most of our collaborators, produced this great white paper, I think the most comprehensive white paper in North America, with your very own University of Florida doing the work under contract. And if you reach out to one of us, we can see that you get that, but it's got a lot of detail about how to process your end markets and what those challenges and opportunities might be. So thank you. Oh, did I get
Thing went
distracted?
forward,
I
yeah.
think we'll,
Pass
for
on.
sake of time, I think
Okay.
we should probably do that.
Thank you, Terry. Very, very good presentation, as always. Questions? Yeah.
Are you familiar with Torex?
Yes.
So Torex, that tornado that they affect with the glass that's in, I think they do a pretty good job with the sheetrock. So, watch the work that I went up to do it, and they take it, the paper comes off through the tornado process, everything, the dust comes back and we resell it back to the sheetrock people. Almost 50% recycled into the new virgin material.
I did observe the Torx processing drywall. So I don't want to make an ad one way or the other. One of the things you're going to need to think about is dust control with that system and wear parts. So just CapEx, operating costs, I haven't operated one, so I can't say that any of those are legitimate. That was just my observation.
I think like a lot of things in the recycling space, just because you can doesn't mean it necessarily makes economic sense when many of the end markets are, you know, $0 or negative, right? It's hard to invest in a lot into the infrastructure to do it, so that's always a challenge. Anything else on drywall? Nobody? Can I give a shout out to Sarasota? Can I give a shout out to Sarasota?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, Terri, in the interest of time, we skipped and he went forward with the LCA, the life cycle analysis that CDRA has funded specific for recycled gypsum in the past, and I think it is worth mentioning, if you don't mind, Terri. Recycled drywall hasn't necessarily shown up as favorably under like EPA's warm model, and so some of our practitioners in the field, like Terri, said, hey, one of the ways we can increase recycling is to make sure the environmental benefits are understood. So we went about last year starting an LCA specific to gypsum drywall, recycled gypsum drywall. We're through the preliminary stages of that. There's another phase to go. So far, it's certainly situational, but it's coming out much more favorable than any existing LCAs that are out there, which will help inform future policy and obviously investments into infrastructure and so forth. But we were pleased, and I wanted to give a shout out, they're not here, but Sarasota County in Florida was one of our members who helped fund that work. LCAs are not inexpensive, and for our next phase, we're looking for those interested to help us fund that next phase of third-party verification and so forth. It's certainly an important component of what we do and how we help promote the value of recycled materials. So with that, if no other questions, then we'll depart from gypsum drywall and go to shingles, another hot topic in our industry. So Dan Horton with ASR Systems.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about my favorite subject, or at least one of my favorites, asphalt shingle recycling. So today what we'll talk about is kind of a historical view. There's been some great success in 2016, 17, 18, 19 for use of RAS in roads, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll talk about the leading states that have used RAS and then are currently using RAS. RAS meaning recycled asphalt shingles. We'll talk about decarbonization of asphalt paving, and then advancements in processing. We'll talk a little about my company, how we got started, what we are doing, and then also the roofing industry or circularity. And then of course CDRA. I've worked very, very hard with the CDRA and Terri and the Shingle Recycling Committee to relaunch shinglerecycling.org, and I'll show you a little a screenshot of that later. The probably misunderstood number is shingles in landfills. And so, much like Terri, I've gone through the actual sales of roofing shingles as reported by the Asphalt Roofing Manufacturers Association and correlated the waste generated based on sales. One interesting statistic is that a square of roofing shingles weighs between 240 to 250 pounds. A 3-tab is about 225. For each square of shingles sold in 2018, each square generated 222 pounds of waste. So almost only 10% less than the manufactured materials used for the material, for processing. The lowest sales year you can see there's 2011, where 108 million squares of roofing were sold, The recycled rate that year was over 20% because of that low manufactured rate. In 2024, we just got the numbers in, there were 172 million squares sold. So a 70% increase in sales of roofing from that low year. The drivers for sales are, you probably in Florida as well as Texas is another state that fights with this. The weather or storm-related activity with respect to roofing can be as much as 25 to 30% of total sales for the year. New construction typically will account for 18 to 22%. Just someone deciding today I want a new roof just doesn't happen that often. I mean, it just doesn't happen. There is a new group, Fortified, or a group Fortified, that is trying to build a better roofing system so that when a storm happens, there isn't as much roofing waste. Usually there's roofing waste and drywall. I'm sorry, not drywall, but plywood or eaves are blown off also. So they're trying to tie the roofing material into a system that is more indestructible. The roofing manufacturing companies have also built shingles that are more resilient, meaning that they are adding a higher wind resistance through a better sealant, and then in addition to that, weight, and then in addition to that, nail zones. So in the nail zone, they put a scrim that is a higher strength fiber. It's hard to recycle, by the way, because it just doesn't break apart like fiberglass. The roofing waste recycled to roads. The number one, and really in some years, the only use of recycled asphalt shingles was reducing the full-size shingle into a 3/8" product and introducing it to roads on the aggregate side. One thing I want to drive home here today is that 78% of a roofing shingle is aggregate. So 78% is aggregate, 22% is asphalt. So my work, and others like me, so I'm not the only one, my work has been to separate the aggregates from the asphalt to have a higher value asphalt, and then also have the ability to reuse those aggregates in different markets. That being said, as I mentioned, in 2011, the shingle market was low, the recycle rate was high. The highest recycle rate, I believe, was showing there 2014. There was as much as 2 million of a 14 or 15 million ton market, 2 million tons used in roads back in the middle part of that graph. Last year, 2022, the last year that was reported for roof to roads, there were 673,000 tons of RAS used in hot mix asphalt. Much like, and almost exactly like drywall. Drywall was reported in that 2018 study that was published by EPA in 2020, reported drywall at 15.2 million tons of waste drywall. I would dispute that, but I use that as a benchmark. For us, it was 15.1. So which is just over 2% of the total C&D waste. So I can understand the focus needs to be on a 600 million ton market, and only 2.5 is drywall, 2.5 is shingles. But I would tell you there's a lot of great aggregate there. It's silicate that has a Mohs hardness of 7. It's specific, I mean, it's already 8 to 30 mesh. And then the calcium carbonate is typically around 60% minus 325 mesh. I'm sorry, 2.2%, not 2.5. So this is a graph of the total C&D waste. Per capita is the way that I've measured the southeast. I used the same number, just kind of went per capita. Obviously, that's not perfect, but it does give us an idea. So in the south, or I guess we should go with Florida, we have per capita 1.3, let me see, 111 pounds of waste. Let me see if I can get this right. There's 7.4 million tons of roof waste in the south, 1.3 million tons in Florida. That's significant. Florida, Texas are two of the largest roofing use states, North Carolina. But it has a lot to do with the population. I do understand that in Miami or Dade County, there's a lot of tile and there's other, metal work that's done in the state, but it's still a significant amount of waste in one state. This is the 673,000 tons I was talking about that were used in roads in 2022. Recycle rate of less than 4%. The use of RAS in roads, or recycled asphalt shingles in roads, hit its peak 3 or 4 years after asphalt per ton hit its peak. So that kind of makes sense, right? So $827 per ton in 2009. About 3 years later, the hot mix asphalt plants were using the materials. Unfortunately, what happened is the use was not as studied and probably was overused. And there's been a correction, and today 1/3 of the high is the numbers used. But there's also, as in any class in engineering, there is learnings. So the learnings are that the asphalt is different. It has a higher melting point or softening point, and that higher softening point causes the asphalt, if mixed, to be a harder asphalt overall, which means that it would crack or dry out earlier. So you would have roads that would ravel or possibly crack. But now's the time to recover, and there's been an enormous amount of research done to change the way that RAS is used in roads. And there's also, of course, the decarbonization, the decarbonization drive, as well as reducing landfill use. The reason for showing this graph is that there's 17 million tons of RAS that has been used in roads since 2009. 17 million tons in roads is a solid testing point. Clearly, there's 15 million tons that are wasted every year. But clearly there's enough research now for people to be able to use RAS in roads and use it effectively. And the price point for the hot mix asphalt plants is good. I mean, they'll save money as well as the states. In that case, there's been $1.7 billion saved by Department of Transportations and states over those years. These are the states that have approved. This is on our website at shinglerecycling.org, where you can find the information on the website at shinglerecycling.org. And of course, this presentation is being published. Florida is a red state, meaning it is not being used here. We'd like to get that changed, of course. North Carolina is a very good state for use. These are the top states: Washington, Texas, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, North Carolina. The reason it's working as a additive into hot mix asphalt in those states is because of an engineered approach to using the materials. So they're adopting something called balanced mix design, and a balanced mix design is a performance design of the road using recycled asphalt shingles blended with other materials, including oils or recovered oils, And I think the number one is Cargill Anova is a rejuvenator that has been used in some of these states, and it's working. Another is to mix it with other recyclates such as tires. Of course, the real reason to do it for, or at least the future of using RAS in roads, is decarbonization. This is a graph showing the amount of savings, our greenhouse gas emission savings by using RAP or recycled asphalt paving. The reason why this is important is this is a published number showing that the equivalent of 595,000 cars were removed from the road by using recycled asphalt paving. Recycled asphalt paving has, or is given credit for 1/3 of the asphalt that recycled asphalt shingles were given. So, for example, if you use 1 ton of recycled asphalt shingles, you would take 3 times the number of cars off the road as recycled asphalt paving. This is an example, but it must be validated with life cycle analysis. But it's certainly shown. I think one of the objectives that we've initiated with the National Asphalt Paving Association is to validate the savings through life cycle analysis. And we do have an initiative through the CDRA to do that within the next 12 months. This is an example of equivalency exactly to RAP, showing that over 350,000 cars since 2009 have been taken off the road using RAS in roads. This is our first facility that I built in 2010. You can see we just brought shingles in. We actually cleaned up a site that was speculative and brought waste shingles in on dump trailers, but we also, of course, work with roofing contractors. We produced 3/8 at that factory, but in addition to that, we built a powder production facility. So we brought in equipment and separated roofing granules or sand from the powder, creating a higher density asphalt powder. That higher density asphalt powder, we then built a second plant in Connecticut. That density powder we were putting in bags and shipping to a roofing plant to mix with liquid asphalt. And so the asphalt content for that powder is around 30%. And we were building or making a slurry from that powder to coat asphalt shingles. So this is our small pilot plant built in Stratford, Connecticut in 2016. Our first full-size plant was built at ICO in Hawkesbury, Ontario. That plant takes full-size shingles, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, takes full-size shingles from the factory line. We put those into a shredder, and over 400 feet, only because that's the size we wanted it to be, over 400 feet, we progressively reduce it and separate it into powder and sand. When at the end of the line, we take the powder and we dissolve it in a liquid bath, and then we pump it to the shingle line to be used on shingles. So it's the first circular processing center in North America that processes roofing shingles into powder and liquid for reuse back in roofing shingles. So that's one technology. There's a second technology that's being sold now by Saint-Gobain, or Certainty. This is for road paving. We had a shingle recycling forum at the CDRA in October, and this was launched. The way this works is you recycle roofing shingles into a certain size. It's proprietary. It's blended, creating a pellet, which of course, you've seen lots of pellets with MSW. So this would be a created pellet, and then that pellet is more easily introduced into road mixes with a predictable result. So it's a interesting technology. They've had some success with it, and I think they're looking for licensing agreements. There's a third technology. So you have powder, you have pelletizing, and then the third technology is extraction. So how can we make the perfect, or how can we deconstruct the roofing shingle and make a perfect material? So liquid asphalt, sand, limestone, and then resell it to different markets or reuse it back in a shingle. There are 4 companies I know of that are doing that. 3 are highlighted here: Renovias, North Star, which is a Canadian company, and then a company called Sky Quarry. All 3 of these companies are becoming a little aggressive and are looking for places to recycle roofing shingles into liquid. And Sky Quarry and North Star are publicly traded, so you can find them. I think Sky Quarry is on NASDAQ, North Star is Canadian. The CDRA is an advocate and promotes recycling of all C&D, and one of the reasons I believe that shingle recycling has progressed is over the years, CDRA has promoted it through their shingle recycling forums, the shinglerecycling.org, and the roofing manufacturers and processors, as well as equipment manufacturers, are very, very active in our group. We're always looking for ideas on how to better what we're doing. We just did a relaunch of shinglerecycling.org. I recommend to jump on there. There's over 140 documents that are published related to shingle recycling back into different, different outlets or different end markets. There's a host of proprietary technology that we talked about that is not listed there, but there are patents that are written. I think there's now over 20 patents on shingle recycling. I hold 5 of them. There were 13, and so at one point I had a pretty large percentage. It keeps dwindling, so either I have to file more patents or or just use them more. We did put together a contractor's guide at CDRA. This is for your roofing contractors. It gives a guide to how to sort jobs for recycling. One of the differences between, of course, MSW and drywall is shingles are usually a single stream. They're all alone. It's a single project. The projects weigh between 4,000 and 10,000 pounds per job, and there's some wood because of occasional plywood removal. There's a little bit of metal sometimes, and if they know they're recycling, typically you don't even have food stuff in it or Lunchables. So it's a great business to be in if you have the end market, and the end markets are starting to grow. So thank you. I do appreciate your time, and it's an honor to be here and talk to the SERC. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Questions for Dan? Yes, he said it all, didn't he?
Yeah, we have shingles in our permit for use it as alternative fuels, but that 70% of solids or aggregates is what's forbidding us to use it truly as a fuel. So what are the chances of, at the end, putting a mechanical separation process, particularly in Florida, where there is no permit for using as an asphalt or recycle or recover as an asphalt, no? But we definitely, cement kilns in general should definitely be able to use if we can get it to a lower percentage of solids. And that, is there any initiative or anything going on that allow us to cement kilns to be able to use it?
Yes, I mean, the issue with using the material as a, as a fuel source at the cement kiln is, of course, the solids. So you have silicates and calcium carbonate is going to cause a lot of ash. Yeah.
Cement kilns, the ash is not a problem. It's more about the silicate, because the calcium carbonate is not a problem. The silicate is what is a problem. It's very hard to burn.
So there's a couple of patents out there. I've written one, and there's another manufacturer that's written one. What we do is take out the silicates using a separation process so that the powders are only calcium carbonate and asphalt. So it's only fuel and calcium carbonate. I think it's perfect for the cement world. The silicate has a market back to the roofing manufacturer as a headlap or as a roofing granule. We're looking for partnerships like that would take the materials that are probably the higher value, just because there's a lot of volume and you can sell them at 5,000 tons at a time, but you need to sell 40 or 50,000 tons a year to or I should say 30 to 35,000 tons of that particular material annually to be profitable at a facility.
For a cement plant, that number is not possible to achieve. Typical cement plant uses 100,000 tons of coal per year.
Yeah, I think it's just, I think it's been more of a match. No one's actually probably come to you and said, would you like to try this? So I think it's really a match. I think it's a match. No one has really gone out there and done that. And part of it is, there's a reason for that. Part of that is that asphaltic limestone powder has a lot of value as asphalt. And so, reusing that and making a roofing shingle would be good. Also, if you were to make the slurry like we're doing at the ICO plant in Hawkesbury, when you make that slurry, you can save a lot of money on virgin asphalt. But the reality is that at 10% recycled content, which is the most I think a roofing manufacturer will have in the next 10 years, if you sold all this asphalt and limestone at 10%, you're still only solving 1.5 million tons of the problem. We need cement manufacturers to take a look at the material. We need paving manufacturers to find new ways to use this higher value material. And there's probably several other outlets that maybe haven't been even promoted to use it, because you really have to have a greater solution than what we have now. And it's sales. No one's been selling you or the cement plant. So, yep.
And I think also, in the case of both of you, again, we'll go back to this idea of diversion versus recovery of valuable raw materials, right? As secondary processors, you're adding a ton of value in your, whether it's sorting or size reduction or separation, to make a spec product that has more value than just saying, hey, it's going to go to landfill anyway, send it to us. That's really, obviously, there's a disconnect from the value chain there as to what are you willing to pay for it and what did he have to put into it to make it into a product that you could use safely, consistently at a higher volume. So those are some of the things that need to get sort of worked out there.
There is a financial feasibility a test that has to be done, and then the other thing, and I think you said it very well, the chicken or the egg. I think I should have a chicken and the egg slide, because we really need the infrastructure to make it happen. But you understand all that, of course.
But I think what's I think what's really important, and both of you alluded to it, I think timing couldn't be better with the forces that are at play from a sustainable materials standpoint, from particularly multinational companies that are under maybe ESG pressures from their European company or so forth. I think the cement industry has made some pretty significant pledges towards more of a zero waste initiative, and so you know, here are some of the ways to get there that, you know, it's a process. And that's why we exist as CDRA to help advocate for those higher value end markets and tell the story of it, because it is resource versus waste. And I know we probably hear a lot of that at sessions like this. Do you mind putting the next slide deck? I just have a couple of slides. If there are no more questions, either on shingles or gypsum, please. Sure.
Okay.
Okay, inquiring minds might want to know the same thing. So, again, since we took our time and you took your time this afternoon, I'm just going to give a quick shout out to CDRA so you know who we are. One of the things I think we've done a phenomenal job at in the last couple of years, and why these guys are having some traction, is bringing in not just the MRF operators, who are sort of the recyclers, are our core members, but also bringing all stakeholders to the table. So we have difficult conversations with the gypsum wallboard manufacturers and difficult conversations with the roofing manufacturers to really try to understand what are the barriers to them using more of recovered materials into their new products. And again, we're having some success, and not everything has to be closed loop. There's higher, better value uses along the way. So bringing in everyone from public policy makers, nonprofits, governments who set policy to get the table and understand what some of the challenges are and how we move things forward. So almost no one in the, you know, big circle, if you will, of building materials and products are represented on our, everyone's represented in our membership these days. And we are the national forum for all things C&D recycling, and we exist to promote and defend the recovery and recycling of building materials, and we share knowledge and best practices. And really our process, collaborate, innovate, advance. I always remember it by the CIA, the acronyms, and we really are the intelligence agency for C&D recycling. So that's kind of how I like to share it with everyone. And if you liked a conference like Jean's here, covering good topics, you can have 2 full days of programming around all things C&D recycling. From all facets of the market, we'll have manufacturers, we'll have sustainability experts, the contractors that help collect the material, in addition to the leading recyclers in the country, and all of the technology that helps support that. And then we'll be doing a tour of Big City Crushed Concrete, who's the largest concrete recycling facility in Texas. So I encourage you to participate, attend, and come get smarter about C&D recycling. And my contact information here if there's anything we can do to help. No more questions? Jean, did you want to wrap up anything, or?
Yeah, I will. First off, thank you, panelists. That was great. If everybody will help me thank them by a round of applause. And just wrapping up, I will shoot all the presentations, like I said earlier, and get everybody out the proceedings probably this weekend. I'll try to get it done along with recordings. We'll create a YouTube channel and then make that available to everybody. So thank you again for attending. Everybody have a safe trip back. Hopefully those folks that are flying north can get home. Looks like we've got a big storm coming. So thank you, everybody. Safe trip home.